Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, April 18th, 2025, and our friend Alex Krainer is back with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Hi, Nima. Thank you for having me, and my humble apologies for being late today.
No problem at all. Alex, let's get started. I do apologize, everybody who we were trying to. I was trying to talk with Alex, but I couldn't. I didn't know if he has received my emails. That's why I didn't know what's going on, and Alex didn't know. He put on his calendar the next Friday instead of this Friday. Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, because I spent the whole week traveling, and I returned home late last night, and I just kind of wrote down. I didn't even put it in the calendar because then I would realize a mistake. I just kind of wrote it down, Nima Friday that time. But I thought next Friday. So today I just until you actually called me, I was convinced that I'm okay for today.
Yeah. Alex, let's get started with what's going on between the United States and China. And I want to focus on Europe today, but it's so important to understand what's going on between the United States and China. Here is what Victor Gao said in terms of the way that China would respond to the United States.
So if you want to hold a gun at China's head, China will hold a gun at your head. If you want to strike China in the cheek, China will strike you back. That's the decision and the determination of the Chinese nation. This is not belligerency. This is the minimum decency you need to apply to international relations. How can you demand other countries, I will slap you in the face, don't slap me back, otherwise I will punish you more. That's the law of the jungle. The trade war launched by Trump is wrong. It's the wrong war. It's the war against mankind. MAGA, or Make America Great Again, is fine. But you cannot achieve that at the expense of other countries. You cannot achieve your greatness by belittling, by delegating or relegating other countries to the lowest echelon of the hierarchy. Every country has its ambition. Every country wants to be in the first front, first row, for example, and no country should be allowed to trample rules of free trade, to trample international order, and to dictate to others, to issue ultimatum, to hold a gun at your head, to demand submission to my will. This is the law of the jungle, and China will never have a part of that, and China will fight to death to oppose that.
You understand the way that China is perceiving and they're responding to the United States. And do you find this sort of talk, this sort of attitude on the part of China would resonate with the Trump administration? Do they really want to understand what China is talking about?
Well, these are fighting words, and they are very at odds with the normal policy conduct by Chinese government, who are otherwise almost impeccably polite and who express themselves in very gentle and how do you call it, constructive terms. They avoid this type of abrasive confrontational approach. So maybe these kinds of statements are coming out now because they assume, well, maybe the American leadership understands this language, so maybe we need to show a tough side, that we can also bite back. Now, let's rewind the clock a little bit here, because I think that to be fair to the American administration, they do have real grievances against China, because China has been very privileged in the global trade for the last 2 or 3 decades. And I think that many observers today believe that China has been a currency manipulator. They have kept their currency artificially weak in order to bolster their competitive position vis-a-vis the United States and also other countries in the world. But We also have to be fair to China, because this has been enabled by the globalist forces in the West. China has been given every leeway to abuse the global trading system to their advantage. Now, why was this done? It was done because I believe that ever since on 15th August 1971, Richard Nixon ended the convertibility of US dollar into gold, that they understood, they meaning, the real powers in the West, not necessarily the elected governments, but the money lending oligarchies understood that the currency of the United States, once it was completely a fiat currency, would go back to its intrinsic value, which is nothing, which is the value of paper. That the dollar would be slowly destroyed, and that the United States would lose its predominant position in the world. That its wealth would be depleted, that its military would be depleted, and these imperial globalist vested interests then need a new host, right? They need the next power to become the global cup. And they clearly designated China as their next global cup. And so already since the 1970s, almost immediately after Nixon severed the convertibility of the dollar in gold, he and Henry Kissinger started their overtures towards China to open China up, and then gradually enabled China to build itself up into this global economic superpower. And so all this was fine and good until they realized that the Chinese didn't cooperate with this with the view of becoming their next global cup, but with the view of beheading this Western parasite that is, shifting hosts, but always intent on building up a global empire. And so if you go back to the statements by people like Henry Kissinger and George Soros, up until I think 2008, 2009, maybe even a little bit later, they were consistently praising the Chinese model. They were saying that China will be the owner of the process of globalization, that the whole world should be adopting the Chinese model, blah, 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 blah. And then once Xi Jinping took over, they realized it wasn't going to be on their terms. And now Xi Jinping is the big enemy, and China must be destroyed. And so these grievances that exist between the United States and China are being used to accentuate the hostilities, the conflicts between the two systems. Trump and his government could easily resolve this in a peaceful way through diplomacy, but I think that there are some of the people in his cabinet, in his government, who are still loyal to the globalist interests, and I would always equate these globalist interests with the money lending oligarchies headquartered in the city of London and on Wall Street. They want China destroyed. They want China eliminated. And so they are using their influence in Trump administration to, let's say, prevent a peaceful diplomatic solution to the conflict, and to drive the process towards some kind of Cold War, or potentially even hot war at some point in the future.
What was so amazing, Alex, within while having this sort of conflict between the United States and China, you see these people who are in China who are responsible in producing the products of Gucci, Chanel, and all of these famous brands. They're talking about a product that costs 1,500. They're they're selling it $38,000. It's unbelievable. It shows that how China managed its society during the years of this some sort of cooperation between the East and the West, between China and the United States. When you look at the middle class of China, which is almost, I don't know, we can say double the size of the population of the United States, and you see the United States, these oligarchs are getting stronger, getting fatter, and gaining everything from China, but not just helping the society. Just they don't want to spread this sort of wealth throughout this society. It just comes to their pocket. This is the I think this is a fundamental issue in terms of the way that China has managed the economic situation in their country, and the United States wasn't able to do that. Deficit, tariffs, it's all about inefficiency of the economic system of the United States, not about China.
Yes, correct. And I think that the video that you referred to, I saw it, where a man representing a Chinese manufacturer explains in detail how this $38,000 or euro handbag under Hermes brand is produced. He explains exactly the process and the materials or everything that goes inside and how much it costs. And then he says we can produce the same exact handbag for $1,000. We only can put the same logo as Hermes can put, but you can have ours for $1,000, and the Hermes one costs $38,000. Well, this has been one of the the bling factor in Western power, that all of these foreign, let's call them government officials who were loyal to the West, who would be rewarded by having bank accounts in the United States, in London, in Switzerland, in Geneva, and houses and apartments there. They were really being seduced into these positions by saying, hey, you do this for us and you will be able to buy your lady whatever she wants. I've literally read testimonials to this effect, that they were being bribed by telling them, hey, you will be able to give your lady things that she couldn't even dream about. And we saw very recently how Zelensky's wife would travel to London, and then when she would spend, I don't know, a couple of million euros on these, or pounds or dollars, whatever, on these super expensive handbags and luxury and champagne. And so this bling factor of Western power is very real, because it has a real hold on Western leaders, or I mean on the leaders of all these countries that are loyal to Western powers. And now we see a very interesting process of this being dismantled and disintegrated, because they tell you, all these really, really fancy things, well, we actually make them, and you can have them for a lot less. You don't have to pay. And so I think that, if you look at the stock of a company like LVMH in France, who is making all these Louis Vuitton, I don't know if they own Hermes brand, but they own Louis Vuitton and all these champagne brands and caviar and all of these really, really high-end goods. They are part of the big machine of the West. They are the decoration on the facade. And now, with this trade war happening, whether intended or not, the house of cards is coming down. And I think that many people will realize that, all these brands that you guys sell, well, we can have them for a lot cheaper, straight from China. And then, at the very same time, I saw another little video explaining the tariffs on China. which made me think. So this man was saying, look, if the United States imposes 25% tariff on things imported in China, it's actually hurting. And he gave the example of the Nike shoes, or the Nike brand, and he said, look, these shoes that retail in the United States for $100, they're produced in China for $10. 25% tariff is applied on the $10 that it costs to produce the shoes, meaning it's $2.50. So instead of costing $10 to produce, they cost $12.50. So either in the United States, the price goes up from 100 to 102.50, or Nike eats up the margin. Nike loses the margin a little bit. So the attack is hurting these global brands the most, not necessarily the Chinese, because a Western consumer still has the option of ordering those same shoes for $10 or $12.50 direct from China. Maybe they won't have the Swiss brand, maybe there will be but exactly the same product. And now comes the time where the Western consumer is being educated about how the whole supply chain actually works, who makes the most money. And then with the places like Alibaba, Temu, or other Chinese retailers, and with these super efficient payment systems that exist, you find some little ad in social media, and then you go like click, 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 and 5 minutes later the thing is on its way, and it actually arrives. I've bought things direct from China and direct from India, and it's not just China, it's elsewhere. I've purchased things and they arrive. They come by Federal Express, DHL, by post. You pay them online, and you no longer need to go to the big retail store and pay all these Western brands their premium prices. So I think that whatever this trade war, and you have to ask yourself, did the Trump administration people know that this would be the effect? Did they know who they were going to hurt, or is this like unintended consequence and adverse outcome that they're starting to get? But I see that the global system of trade is now going through a very interesting change, which I think in the end might end up benefiting all of us, the Western consumer, hurting the big brands, the big names, and helping the Chinese in the way that they will be able to continue producing, if not for Nike, if not for Intel, then maybe for independent brands and retailers and producers, because now you can go to the same manufacturer that produces Nike shoes. You can say, well, I want to create a Nima brand. I want a Dialogue Works shoes. Make it exactly like the Nike, same quality, same materials, similar designs, but put Dialogue Works on it. And I'll sell it for not $100, for $20. And now you're in business. And it takes very little to actually make this happen. So I don't know. It seems like we're going in the direction of democratization of the retail industries. And I think the people who are screaming the loudest about this are exactly the bondholders of brands like Nike and LVMH and Hermes and so forth, because they realize that they stand to lose, and lose very, very big from all this.
Alex, when you buy from China, do you buy it in dollar? How does it work in your region?
Yes, I usually pay in US dollars. Usually the price is denominated in US dollars. And then you pay with your credit card, or you pay by PayPal. But those, the important thing is that these systems work almost flawlessly. And I think that to derail them, you need some kind of a pretty heavy-handed political interference with them. I don't know. You know, it's not China. It's not just China. I've ordered things from other parts of the world, and the system works. You know, this whole system of distribution through post offices, through DHL, and these payments, it all works. Which means that entrepreneurs and retailers from any country can now access the global market with very low barriers to entry, and completely change the game of the global trade, always to the detriment of these big brands that are charging premium prices for their products. And those products obviously don't have to cost anything near the prices that they are charging. And so, you know, that's another whole big area where the traditional providers, you know, mostly European countries, you know, French products, Swiss products, Belgian products, I don't know, are now going to have to work extra hard to justify their prices. And their very special products will become available from other producers elsewhere in the world. So we'll see, but the changes are definitely interesting. And then if this heavy-handed political interference doesn't come to happen, because it could only come from Europe, really, you know, not even the United States, Europe. If that doesn't happen, then this whole new universe of small retailers, small artisans, publish to order, build to order, produce to order system of production will be able to completely change the world and make it easy for people like you and me to set up new businesses and to sell products and services everywhere in the world without obstacles and without very, very high barriers to entry. And I think that's a very encouraging process. It'll happen if let's say between the Trump administration, China, and Russia, they manage this new trading system for the world and let's say overcome certain barriers that still exist today.
The reason I ask you if you buy products from China in US dollar, because here in Brazil, we don't do that. We buy everything in Brazilian currency. It doesn't matter if dollar goes up, down, the price still the same. And
well, you see, I have the option of buying it in euros. The reason why I buy it in US dollars is because I have a US dollar account with PayPal, and I have US dollar accounts with another bank where I have the credit card. So it's actually all the same. But I think that the question you ask is actually very relevant, because what that implies then is that we're no longer dependent on the dollar, because I guess any country can use their own currency for exactly these types of transactions. It'll be then the question of a bilateral agreement between that country and China to somehow then clear this trade, either through commodities or gold or whichever. But yes, that then is a step in the process of de-dollarizing the world, or at least giving people access to alternatives without having to go through the whole dollar system and then everything flowing through Federal Reserve banks in the United States or European banks who are part of the Eurodollar system.
2 years ago, that's why I'm telling you, 2 years ago, we had to change it to dollar and then send it to China. And the whole process was totally different. Right now, there is no US dollar in the middle to communicate. And I think that it was a huge change for Brazil, for Brazilian customers, because you had to pay the taxes because you had to change your Brazilian currency to dollar, then dollar to Chinese currency. and in the process you had to pay at least 2 times the taxes.
Version, right?
Yeah, and we had the taxes from the government, all of that, but right now it's all eliminated, and we have just the tax of importation if it goes beyond a determined sort of value that the Brazilian government is putting out. But the whole process was so much, right now it's so much easier than it was before, and you can buy things easily in, I would say, if I buy something from China in I will receive it in a very it would be much easier to receive something from China than from Brazil from other cities.
Right. It arrives practically in a few days, right?
In a few days.
Yes, same experience here. And you know what else I noticed? Because I used to be a great fan of Amazon, right? 20 some years ago, Amazon was a phenomenal, because nothing like this ever existed. Like if you set in a non-English speaking country, getting books in English was very, very difficult. And then so Amazon made it very easy to buy books online, and then to buy CDs, and then more and more and more and more product. But what I see now is that very often if you go on Amazon, you find listings of products that are there, they're listed in the catalog, but they're not available for sale. They don't, it's there, but you can't order it. And it's more and more and more things. And so many times I found myself wanting to buy something, but I couldn't buy it. And then I thought, well, how do I get this now? And then I thought, well, I'll check Alibaba. And then I check Alibaba, sure enough, all of those products, and 1,000 times more. It's like a forever of choice. It's all there, and it's super easy to buy. And the Chinese retailers are extremely professional. The thing arrives, it's properly packaged. They insert a little catalog of other products that they also offer. It's some kind of a combination of 21st century online shopping with Turkish bazaar, because some products you can order directly, like click and it goes. With other products, you have to go and get in touch with the producer, and then an actual human being engages with you, and you talk to them, and then they say like, okay, I'll give you an order because it's the first time you buy from us. So it's very fun. But in the end, the process works, and you get the thing. And what they say that they will send to you, you receive it. It's not like you get like a wooden laptop. Like once upon a time, people would order cheap laptops and then they would receive a wooden one. And so I think that's an absolutely phenomenal development. And I'm very glad that you shared your news about Brazil, because that means that some very significant problem was solved between China and Brazil in a bilateral fashion. So they made sure that these trade communications and payment systems function flawlessly, which will ultimately be to the benefit of Chinese producers and Brazilian consumers. But that also means that probably the process is two-sided. So now, if a producer of something in Brazil wants to sell their products in China, process probably functions just as smoothly, which is then fantastic, because we don't have to, as you said, we don't have to go through these conversions of buying dollars and then converting the dollars into Chinese yuan, and then I think it's a revolution for the global economy, actually.
Alex, the rumors that it seems it's getting much more serious as time goes by is that the BRICS will announce a new international payment system. And we know that the tariff war on China and the conflicts in Ukraine, in the Middle East, which is, I don't see any sort of, and even the Trump administration is not sure about the conflict in Ukraine. They don't know. They're waiting for a response from Russia. I would assume that the sort of response they're waiting for is the same sort of response they're waiting from China. They're not going to get it. And How is that going to influence the BRICS and the future of BRICS, in your opinion?
You see, I believe that in the end, the United States will have to join. That the United States will discover we can't beat them, so we join them. And I think that in one of my conversations with Larry Johnson, I think he was the he owns this quote, but I really like it. He said, and maybe maybe it wasn't him, but I if I remember correctly, it was he. He said, the United States has the choice of being the global policeman and forcing everybody to submit to their will, or they can be a polite guest at the global banquet. And I think that's a really good way to put it, because I think that if you remove all this intermediation, all this debt financing, all these premium prices that are being imposed by virtue of near monopolies, because if you want to buy, we're talking about tennis shoes, right? You have a handful of brands that we recognize because you have Nike and this and this and this, and then they get to charge you 10 times what it cost them to produce that thing, and we pay it because we don't know any better. But once you start learning about the production processes, somebody explains to you, well, it's this material and this thread and this glue, and this is how we put it together, and we are doing it so we can do it for anybody, any brand, any materials, any colors. Then you realize, oh, I guess I can have the same thing for 1/10 of the price. Oh, that's interesting. Because, the result is that we are then all a lot wealthier, because we're no longer paying the rent to the landlord, right? So now we can live for free. I'm using a metaphor, but suddenly, by virtue of this immense productivity that our societies are now capable of, we could all be a lot wealthier, and we can actually afford nice things, to use the cliche. Rather than not being able to afford nice things, we can afford them. And a 38,000 euro handbag can now be had for 1,000 euros. Well, that's something. And then who knows what else? Because one of the things I've discovered in kind of informally researching these things is that there are much, much better products out there serving the same thing, for which I thought I needed something else. I wanted to buy XYZ product, and then I discovered from Chinese manufacturers that they have a much, much better solution, and I don't need that product at all. I can have this other thing that does the same thing much better, and the thing is much cheaper than what I was planning to spend. And so there's like a whole world of discovery out there for, not just for consumers, but also for entrepreneurs. Because you could take one of these solutions, you can brand it, Alex Krainer or Nima Al-Khorshid, and bring it to the market, to people who didn't know that this kind of a solution existed.
Yeah. Alex, and the main focus of this talk today, I wanted, as I mentioned in the beginning of this talk, I wanted to focus on Europe and the way that Europe is dealing with Donald Trump and these new phenomenon in their eyes, in the eyes of European. It's a new phenomenon that they have to deal with. And we had Meloni visiting the United States. And on the other hand, you see Germany is in a big problem. Mercedes-Benz is just moving to Hungary. And because of why they're doing this? Because of cheap Russian gas. That's why they're doing this. Because the German government is so stubborn not to admit that they're killing themselves. How, on one part, you see the Trump administration tries to gain everything at its disposal for the benefit of the United States. On the other hand, you see the Europe is somehow confused. They don't know what do they want. They don't know what would be the benefit for Europe. Even they don't. I don't see they're somehow dealing with Donald Trump, but they're destroying themselves in the in this conflict in Ukraine, in the tremendous hate and I don't know enmity that they're having toward Russia. How do you see Europe today? How do you see Europe dealing with the United States? Because Europe needs, or maybe we should say European countries need to think about how to deal with the United States. Because if the war between China and the United States, as we know, get worse, and we know that the Europe has European countries need to have a new strategy in terms of dealing with these two superpowers. They're superpower. There has to be something there to deal with it. Do you see that existing, or the European countries going after that?
It exists on the margins, but it doesn't exist in the mainstream. I think in the mainstream, the political leadership of major European powers is profoundly disoriented. They have absolutely no idea what just hit them, because the whole setup in Europe has been that they are a loyal vassal of the United States. That is, they're the loyal vassal of the Western Empire, and then the Western Empire takes care of them, defends their privileges vis-a-vis the rest of the world, and that this relationship was very much taken for granted. And so they, as vassals, became engrossed in, as far as I can say, two major projects. One of them is net zero, and the other one is Ukraine. And they were completely unprepared that that the boss, that the new sheriff would drop them, that he would withdraw their protection, that he would increase the price of protection racket, because first it was 2% of GDP for defense, now it's 5% of the GDP for defense. It's not really increasing the price, it's telling them we're done, and giving them such extortionate price that no country in Europe can even dream about allocating 5% of the, it's not 5% of the government budget, it's 5% of the GDP. The size of this is extraordinary. Like for Germany, they would now have to spend more than half of their government budget on defense to satisfy the United States, so that Trump would say, like, well, okay, then we'll guarantee your security, but not those others who pay less than 5%. It's an impossible. It's a way of saying we're done with you all. And so I think that the ability of individual European governments to deal with the United States, as with Russia, as with China, as with all the other powers, is there, but it's in opposition and it's on bilateral basis. Everything that goes through Brussels, I'm afraid it's too ossified around this obsolete post-World War II global order, which is now disintegrating. And so I think that the fix will not be found there. And I think that this order of things in Europe will get very, very pathological. And I think that it will do everything that it can to push Europe into World War III, to weaponize European societies in every way in order to orchestrate a big third big war on the European continent against Russia. They're dead serious about this. They're doing it. The drive is coming predominantly from London, but also with wholehearted support from Paris, as well as the Netherlands, and then some other minor countries in Europe like the Baltic states, Denmark, Sweden, and so forth. I hope that the drive will fail, because Europe is now lacking a number of the ingredients that you need for a big war. Not just not just the public acquiescence, public consent for war. You need also heavy industries and steel. And then, in addition to, in order for the heavy industries to run, you need cheap energy, which Europe doesn't have. And I think that what you mentioned, Mercedes-Benz shifting some of their production to Hungary because of access to cheap energy, is symptomatic exactly in this sense, because you have a country which is defending their own sovereignty, which is defending their ability to have trade deals with other countries independent of Brussels, and which is refusing to sanction Russia in exactly the same way that the Europe is doing. And so they therefore have access to cheap Russian energy, whereas Germany doesn't any longer, Poland doesn't any longer. And so we see industry going to where countries are sovereign, and in that they can provide security, because if you make a major investment in a country, you want to be sure that it's going to be okay for 20, 30, 50, 100 years. Whereas if you're planning business in this madhouse called Europe, it's very, very difficult. And I honestly, Nima, I feel this on my own skin, because what happened to me two weeks ago is that I developed a certain business. Everything was put in place. The business started. And what happened then? 2 weeks ago, my bank blocks my account. So now you cannot pay bills. You cannot get paid. And you have no recourse. There's, because this is not where, the law enforcement suspects that you've done something wrong or illegal or criminal, and then they do an investigation, and then they determine, they determine the prosecution file, and then you go to court and you defend yourself. No, this is just the bank saying, hey, justify your business to us. And then they say, no, we're not happy with this. Because, some of these things should even be confidential. A contract between you and your client should be confidential, right? The bank should not be able to ask you this. But they say, we don't care. We're just going to block your account, which can completely destroy your business. And they have no case against you. There's no law that you're breaking. They're not proving that you've done anything wrong. They're just saying you're guilty until you can prove to us that you're not. And so this is, European Union's legal framework has been turned over on its head. And it's creating a profound sense of insecurity. And we're all hitched to, we're all subject to this. Whereas a sovereign nation like Hungary can maybe provide you better guarantees that they will not interfere with you unless they can prove that you're doing things illegally outside of the bounds of law. And so maybe, it's cheap energy, but there's also all these other elements which in this EU madhouse are becoming so unpredictable that I think that any business person, any entrepreneur, any industry have to feel a sense of profound insecurity. Because, if they can do it to me, they can do it to anybody else. And they can probably do it to whole industries. They can, somebody in Brussels can decide that XYZ pharmaceutical company, maybe Pfizer wants to buy them out. And maybe these people want to remain independent. Well, then, through the banking system, you can squeeze them and force them to become absorbed into a burgeoning monopoly. Europe is becoming an economy of it's being Sovietized. That's what's going on.
Yeah. Alex, I think as time goes by, Europe needs to ask itself, do they really need the European Union? Or even the broader issue would be, Does Europe need NATO? Because I see European Union as a tool in the hand of NATO to do whatever they want to do, making new enemies, making new wars. And these are huge questions for Europe to be answered in the near future, unless they're just going down and just destroying themselves totally.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There is an unexplained symbiotic relationship between the European Union and NATO. And when Croatia was applying to become a member of the United Nations, member of the European Union, we first had to become a member of NATO. So I think that Croatia became a NATO country, NATO member country in 2008, 2009, something like this, and it became member of the European Union 4 years later in 2013. And if you ask the officials, they will deny it. No. One has nothing to do with the other. That's different. Those are different things. One is about security. The other one is about freedom and democracy or whatever. But, at the time in Croatian media, in the public discourse, it was taken for granted that becoming a member of NATO was a precondition, that we could not even dream about becoming a member of the EU without first becoming a member of NATO. Now, the reason is because most of these population of Eastern European countries were very much in favor of being member of the EU. We all wanted to be member of the EU because we perceived it as a better rule of law, more prosperous union where we would be able to trade and have higher salaries and bigger businesses and so on and so forth. And so NATO, most people were not in favor of joining NATO, but they thought like, okay, it's a bitter pill to swallow for a better future with the European Union. Of course, this all turned out not to be quite exactly true, but it so happens that 11 out of 11 nations of Eastern Europe who became members of the European Union first became members of NATO. And the same thing is happening with Ukraine. Ukrainians are being promised, or were being promised, membership in the European Union, but first they have to become a member of NATO. And this always goes through this interminable process where a country has to practically submit. It has to become a colony of the European Union. Through these interminable negotiations where all kinds of pressures are being applied. Ukraine concretely, I think that they first began negotiations with the European Union at some point in 2007 or even earlier. And then they had, I think, 22 consecutive annual summits of accession between EU-Ukraine summit. And every time the European Union officials would find some reason why Ukraine is not ready, you have to improve your rule of law, or you have to improve the independence of your judiciary, independence of your central bank, media freedoms, human rights, blah, blah, blah. They would always find a reason to dismiss them. But it's this invisible carrot that was being offered them, and they were being strung along. But the first milestone was to push them into NATO. And in Ukraine's concrete example, there was an even more immediate milestone, and that was to go to war against Russia. And so you're absolutely right about that. And the problem is that this is not transparent. This is not laid out in the open to say, okay, you can become a member of the EU, but first you have to join NATO. This is never said explicitly. But, if you observe it happen again and again and again in country after country after country, and then you look at what the officials are discussing in the process of application to NATO then it's unmistakable. NATO and European Union was being dangled in front of all these countries as some prestigious club to join, but first you must join NATO, and then you have to pay the protection racket. And then you know what happens when you join NATO, then they tell you, okay, first of all, your whole intelligence system, your whole secret state police has to become dominated and run by NATO officials. It has to become part of the NATO internal security mechanisms, and then we're going to overhaul your defense industries. So, for example, Croatia had its own production of heavy military equipment. You know, cannons, howitzers, 152 millimeter rounds, and even we had a production of the, I think, T-82 tank, which was based on the Soviet model, but modernized a very good, very battle effective tank that we produce domestically. Well, you know, because now they want to sell you the Leopards, and then they say, like, no, you have to completely stop your heavy. You can produce light arms, but not the heavy equipment. That you have to buy from us. And you know, to buy that from us, you have to pay our, you know, military industrial complex for that. And so it's a big protection racket in the end.
Yeah. Alex, in the Middle East, we know that the United States is just moving a lot of bombs to Israel and preparing in the Diego Garcia. Israel is just preparing. Even we had an article in New York Times talking about there is some sort of division within the Trump administration. One side wants to assist or help Israel in attacking Iran, and the other part are just against it. This is not the right time to attack Iran. How do you think that what's going on? Actually, when we talk about New York Times, I feel that New York Times is not that much credible to.
You're very kind.
The official rhetoric for the United States. But do you think that Netanyahu would be that much stupid to attack Iran if the United States let him to do?
I think not, Nima. I mean, and it's not because he's stupid, but I think because he knows that he would be defeated in a very spectacular fashion. You know, the Israeli attack would be ineffective, as their last attack was. And then the retaliatory strike from Iran would be devastating. So that would be on him. So, you know, he still wants to attack Iran, but he wants the United States to lead the charge, so that the United States does all the dirty work and all the heavy lifting. And he says, like, well, you know, it's our ally, and they agreed with us. They know that we have to stop these evil mullahs in Tehran, right? And make sure that they don't have, you know, weapons or nuclear programs, civil or military or any kind of anything. They have to go back to being nomads with camels, I guess. But he would prefer for the United States to own that war, because Israel by itself gets a shot in the face. And I think that's pretty much the end of it. If the United States owns the war, then it can turn into, you know, it can escalate. You know, United States attacks Iran, Iran strikes back. Then the United States says, like, well, this is, you know, this cannot stand. Now we're going to send infantry and you know, the whole ground assault into Iran, and we mobilize our allies in the region, and we mobilize the NATO and everybody, and we go into this big giant war against Iran. And then maybe, hopefully, in a long protracted quagmire, they manage to regime change Iran, bring it back into the fold, install the next Shah. They already have the son of Reza Pahlavi, right, lined up. He's begging for the job. He's going there to Israel and being friends with Netanyahu and everybody. So in that case, that fantasy might hold water a little bit, but it would entail a major escalation of the war. So not just the United States, not just Israel, but a big escalation, a world war actually against Iran. Whereas if Israel attacks by itself, it's just going to, it will be just like hopping into the ring with Mike Tyson. You're going to throw a punch and then you're going to get knocked out, and that's going to be the end of it. So that doesn't work at all.
And when it comes to Russia and China, it seems, Alex, the whole changes that have happened during the conflict in Ukraine, Taiwan, Middle East, it's just as each and every day we see that the connection between Iran, Russia, and China is growing, and is growing stronger. We have Iranian foreign minister, yes, they went to Russia to deliver the letter of the supreme leader of Iran to Vladimir Putin. We have China totally connected with Russia in terms of their economic war with the United States. And I was wondering if the United States has any sort of a strategic plan in the new administration. We were talking about Donald Trump and his administration before Donald Trump coming to power in the United States. We had some sort of hope that he's going to change it. But do you think that these people who are working with him, like Marco Rubio, these are pretty the establishment of the United States? These are not people or I see Marco Rubio as the same way that I saw Mike Pompeo. I don't see any sort of difference between the two characters. Do you think that these people are going to continue working with Donald Trump, or as time goes by, Donald Trump would fire them? Because if we assume the first administration, that wouldn't help us in sorting out the things with the United States. It would be a quagmire.
It's an interesting question, Nima, and I think that we can only guess. But we can see that Trump. I think I agree with you about Marco Rubio, but we can see that Trump keeps a certain distance, keeps Marco Rubio at a certain distance. That he sends him to talk to his counterpart, like the foreign minister or even lower, but he sends Steve Witkoff to talk to the real people, the people like Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin. And so I think, why is that? I think that he has a certain personal relationship with Witkoff. I think that he has a certain personal loyalty bond with Steve Witkoff. And I think that he sends him where important deals are being discussed and prepared. Whereas Marco Rubio, in one of those press conferences, he told them in front of everybody, "We're going to keep an eye on you very carefully." Ha ha ha. But it tells you something. It's my biggest source of confusion about this is, are these people making it up as they go along, or do they have a plan? Have they thought things through? And from many people, I've got basically the following impression. People who know Trump, or who know people who have dealt with Trump, they all say that Trump is not exactly a deep thinker, that he's not really very focused, that he doesn't read, and that he kind of shoots off the hip. That's the impression. Rightly or wrongly, that's what I get. But I also got some information from people like for example, a Croatian politician from Bosnia who went to Washington to deal with, not with Trump, but not even with Rubio, but people in Trump administration, a little bit lower in the ranks. And he said that he was very surprised that these people are extraordinarily well briefed, well informed, and very knowledgeable. He said, "Look, I went there. I thought I was going to have to explain to them where Bosnia is on the map and how they knew everything." So they were very qualified to have these high-level talks with him and to know what the issues are. And so he went away with a very, very positive impression of the Trump administration. But you see, that's a little bit lower in the ranks. But still, this is very important because, as we know, you might have Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth who say like, "Yeah, let's go bomb Iran. We're going to win. We're the best." But then they have to mobilize this whole hierarchy. And, as people like Larry Johnson say and Douglas McGregor, he says it's very often the colonels in the military who decide what's going to end up being done and what's not going to end up being done, because maybe Pete Hegseth can say like, "Bomb Iran," and maybe his generals will say like, "Aye, aye, sir, we're going to go bomb Iran," but maybe then the colonels and the lower ranking people are going to say, "Are you mad? We're not doing this." And then the machine stops. They say like, "No, we can't do this for these reasons. Send back the feedback that we're not doing this for XYZ reasons." And then they have to take this into account. Well, we had an example of this when last year Keir Starmer came to Washington D.C. and met with the Biden administration people. And he came with a list of targets in Iran, because it's always the British who are pushing for this war in the Middle East. List of targets in Russia to strike. And Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, George Biden was on auto pen already. They were all in favor of this. But then the feedback came from lower in the ranks in the Pentagon saying, "No, we're not doing this. This is a suicide mission. Goodbye." And in the end, Biden had to tell Keir Starmer, "Sorry, we're not doing this." Even though later then he reversed himself and then he was like, okay, we're going to launch some ATACMS into Russia. And they did. But the whole gambit of escalating the conflict to a direct conflict between United States and Russia didn't go through. And I think that maybe in the same way, even if you have neocons in Trump's cabinet who might be pushing for this, I think it's going to meet resistance from the military ranks.
Alex, I think in terms of the future of what's going on between the United States and Russia, and on the other hand, between the United States and Iran, what could help the process would be just lifting the primary sanctions, because the secondary sanctions are hitting the other countries that are somehow in some sort of relationship with Russia or Iran. But if the United States decides to lift the primary sanctions, the sanctions that which would lead that the American business is going to Iran and Russia, these sort of attitude on the part of the Trump administration would bring a huge change in terms of negotiations that are going on right now. Because I would not argue that if Donald Trump does this, would separate Russia and Iran from China, but would facilitate the way that you were picturing the future, would facilitate the way that the United States can cooperate with BRICS, can coexist with BRICS in a prosperous way.
Yes, I agree with you, but I think that they're going to run into very strong headwinds from vested interests, because there are going to be a lot of people who are going to end up disenfranchised from their interests in the Middle East. For example, the military-industrial complex. For them, going into a big war in the Middle East would be wonderful. It would be massive orders from the government for aircraft, missiles, ammunition, bombs, and all of these things. So they don't necessarily want peace. They don't necessarily want lifting of sanctions. Oil industry, probably. You see, it's not easy to interpret these things if you can't see the lay of the land exactly. But suppose you lift sanctions from Iran, and now Iran is free to fully develop their oil industry and export to the global market without any restrictions. This would be very bad for the price of oil. This would bring the oil price much, much lower. If the oil prices are, let's say, they go back to $40, $30 a barrel, something like this, well, that also reduces the value of the collateral that Western banks hold through their client corporations like BP and Shell and ExxonMobil and so forth. And then, it jeopardizes all these companies' debt to these banks. Maybe they're no longer so profitable. They can no longer finance their obligations to these banks. And then they become zombies, and now you have bad debt on your books, and you need bailout from your central bank. So it could exacerbate the inflationary process that's already there anyhow. So I think that there's a lot of very powerful interests within the U.S. economy that don't want peace, that don't want lifting of sanctions. And so that's, even if Trump and people like J.D. Vance and Witkoff, the let's say the non-neocons in the Trump administration, even if they see this, because it's relatively simple arithmetic of finance, there are very, very powerful interests that are going to be opposed to this and who are going to press hard to make sure. And they will not say this in the open, as I just tried to explain it. They will say, "Oh, Iran is the number one sponsor of terror in the world. They're terrible. It's a regime of religious mullahs," and all these ugly derogatory labels that they use. But they always try to wrap it into something that seems publicly acceptable, to say, "Oh, we're standing up there for principles and freedom, and our number one best buddy ally in the world, Israel, and we need to help them and protect them." And making a deal with now the newest thing is that making a deal with Tehran would be appeasement, like Neville Chamberlain in 1938. Again, they reached for that word appeasement. So they're making it very, very difficult for Trump to do this. And so I don't know how the situation will work out. With respect to Russia, I think it's not really such a big issue, because the Russians themselves don't necessarily want the lifting of sanctions at this point, because they want their domestic, banking and corporate world to reorient their activity towards the East, towards China and Russia and Iran and so forth. And they don't want them again to start looking at the United States as the global center of gravity. I think for Iran it's a bit more complicated, but we'll see what happens. I think maybe it'll take a while, or maybe it'll be gradual. but there's going to be a lot of headwinds from the ruling establishment in the United States, from the corporates and from the banking sector.
Can you show me a single point on this map on the planet, on our planet, that the United States and the policy of military-industrial complex has been beneficial to the United States as a nation? Because when you look at the war in Ukraine, they were defeated, hands down, they were defeated in Ukraine. It was, as New York Times reported, it was the United States that was defeated in Ukraine. It wasn't Ukraine. And this situation in Taiwan would be the same. The Middle East would make a huge chaos for the United States and the future of the economy of the United States. That's why I think, as you mentioned before, in terms of the deal between the United States, this sort of tariff war between the United States and China, and the case of Gucci, Chanel, all of these brands, that oligarchs are getting the benefit, not the people, not the
Yes.
not the nation, and that is called the United States. How do you think that in the United States, those people, those decision makers, are rethinking their strategy in terms of why do we need the military-industrial complex? Can we replace it with something else that could be beneficial to us and to those people who are involved in the military-industrial complex? You cannot just remove them because they're so much powerful. You have to find a solution for that.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that the problem is exactly that for the last 100 years, a bit longer, the United States has been co-opted and infiltrated by the globalist power, by the vested interests who are actually the owners of this Western empire. And this is a reincarnation of the British Empire, which, began to collapse at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. And now we know it as a matter of record that they actually had strategy debates about how to continue. And they decided that they needed to shift to the United States and use the United States as their global cop. And so the effect of this is that the United States has been exhausted militarily and economically and politically and diplomatically on every front, because they've been enforcing this global order practically since World War I. And they have had to maintain these hundreds upon hundreds of military bases everywhere around the world. I don't know, it's what the count is now, like about 800 military bases. It used to be 1,000 military bases in so many hundreds of nations around the world. They have these special operations forces that intervene wherever, where somebody has to be kidnapped or assassinated or regime changed. And, this is a massive cost. Obviously, American people have to be lied to about all of this, because they wouldn't stand for it if they knew what their wealth is being squandered on and what their taxes are being used for. And obviously, in every engagement, the United States finds itself weakened. So they went to Iraq, didn't work out so well. Then they went to Afghanistan first. They got kicked out by the Taliban there, at a massive cost of, I don't know, $3 trillion and 20 years there. Now they're at risk of falling into a quagmire in the Middle East. The United States is being pressured to continue to provide security guarantee for Ukraine at its own cost and at risk of ended up involved in a world war against a nuclear superpower, which is Russia. And this is all, they're being kind of induced to do this with this Zelensky offer of $500 billion of rare earth minerals, which is really a cat in the bag kind of a deal. It's a 3-card Monte. It's by now so obvious and so transparent that I would be surprised if everybody in Trump administration didn't see right through this, which is, I think, why it's exactly Marco Rubio who said in an interview after he met with Zelensky, I think in February, he said, I hope they're not hustling us. But, you know, if he said that in public, in a public interview, then you know that this is what the administration actually thinks. And then also that same Marco Rubio said explicitly that the post-World War II global order is now being used as a weapon against us, meaning, you know, as a weapon against the United States. And you can see from their from the U.S. policies, from their positioning, from the way they discuss things with other leaders in the world, that they are particularly their grievance is particularly focused on European powers, Britain, France, and the EU.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today.
Always a pleasure, Nima. Thank you for having me, and warm greetings to everyone out there.
Yeah. See you
Take
soon.
care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.